Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. If I haven't had an opportunity to meet you yet, my name's Ben Gates, and I have two hats around this place. One is I teach in the history department, and what they call a continuing lecturer, which means I do a whole lot of work and they don't have to pay me as much as other people. But I love it. And then the other hat that I'm wearing this afternoon is I direct the campus ministry program here at Purdue Fort Wayne. And this luncheon that people watching at home can see is very well attended with PFW students today and faculty. Is a joint venture between the campus ministry program and the Dormer School of Business. We co-sponsor these luncheons where we invite a local entrepreneur or CEO or successful businessman or woman to come and talk to our students about what makes for success in the marketplace, as well as things that we care about like character and integrity and values and ethics and that kind of thing. So it's as you'll see, it's a freewheeling kind of discussion. But I'm very happy to have Karl LaPan here today, who is the CEO and president of the Northeast Indiana Innovation Center, and he'll tell you all about that here in just a moment. I do want to mention that we're going to have a quick turnaround, and we have another luncheon in November, and you'll see that advertised very soon, hopefully through the School of Business. I believe the date is November the 14th, if I'm not mistaken, which is another Thursday, and we'll have a catered lunch again, free, if you sign up. And I'm excited to announce that Rob Wallstrom is going to be our guest. Rob is the CEO of Vera Bradley Company. So if you like their handbags, and they're very, very successful company here in Fort Wayne, and I'm sure that he'll have a lot to share with us. So for the students here today, I hope you'll think about signing up for that luncheon as well. And those are the only two we'll have here in the fall. And then we'll have some in the spring. In fact, I just got confirmation yesterday that Scott Glaze, who's the president of Fort Wayne Metals, is coming to share over lunch in February. So, and then we'll have at least one more in the spring semester. So, without any further ado, I'm going to turn the microphone and the meeting over to Karl. And like I said, he's going to take about 10 minutes to introduce himself. And then the students here are going to ask questions for the remainder of the time. So, take it away. Thank you for coming.
Great, thanks, Ben. I'd like to make this really kind of informal, so I hope to get to your questions sooner. So I may speak a little fast. I grew up in Massachusetts, and sometimes New Englanders are very fast talkers. So when I ask my kids, what I should talk about when it relates to kind of my background, they said, well, Dad, it's mostly boring. So they set me up really well, and they said it's also very dated. So that was the expectation my children set for me for coming here and talking to you today. But I think maybe there's a few lessons that I've learned that might be helpful and constructive as you kind of think about your careers and choices that you want to make. And I would kind of say there's really been three periods of my career. So after my undergraduate degree, I went to work for General Electric. GE stands for Gone Everywhere, so I moved 8 times in 9.5 years, working in 8 different strategic business units of GE all over the East Coast and Midwest and the Southeast part of the country. And that really set the tone, because you had to go in, learn these new businesses, these new jobs within these businesses, and be very intellectually curious and figure out things very, very quickly. Because with GE, back in the time when I started, a lot of the emphasis was on promotability. And so to be promotable, you had to be able to be a quick, agile learner, go out and learn lots of things very, very quickly, make a big impact, and then you'd move. Your reward was you got another job that moved you somewhere else. So those GE years really taught me about intellectual curiosity, taught me a lot about trying to figure out how business worked, trying to figure out how the disciplines come together. So in those businesses, I was both in the technical side of the business and in consumer services and financial services and corporate headquarters. So you have to learn a lot of things, be very quick on your feet in terms of how agile your learning style is. And so that really kind of prepared me for the second part of my career, which was when I was recruited here in Fort Wayne to run an advanced biometric identification company. So if you think about secure identification cards for driver's licensing, welfare, correctional facilities, or access control applications, all of that technology was developed here in Fort Wayne by a company called Deck Processes, which was ultimately bought by NBS Imaging Systems. And then I was recruited to Fort Wayne to run the worldwide imaging business. So great opportunity to travel around the world. I did 1.5 million air miles in 6 years. So I spent probably 23 or 24 days a month on the road somewhere in the world, and had an opportunity to really understand kind of political climate, economic climate, sociocultural climate, and technology as it related to working with companies and industries and governments all over the world. And so it really teaches you a perspective of humility, in terms of, we might think we have great technology, but then you look at what other people might be doing in other parts of the world, and they have really great technology as well. And so I did that until we sold the company, and then I stayed on for a few years after the post-acquisition integration. Our parent company was heavily debt leveraged. They had 5 divisions. We were the most capital-consuming division of the company, so of course we were the first to be sold. And there's lots of lessons in mergers and acquisitions and cultural fit. Most of the issues that organizations face when you sell isn't the financial synergies, it's the cultural synergies of, do you really share a lot of the common things between, the two organizations that are merging. After that, we were just having our second child. It was my wife's desire not to move anymore, and so I joined the Innovation Center back in October of 2000 and really focused on growing high quality, higher paying jobs for Northeast Indiana, focused on growing the hometown team. So working with entrepreneurs from high school, all the way through to, we have some entrepreneurs that are 70, 80 years old that are still tinkering, still innovating, still trying to bring ideas to the marketplace. And every day we have the opportunity to help bring people's business dreams to reality, and to be able to walk alongside them to provide the support, the encouragement, and the services that allows them to hopefully take their idea and make substantial and good impact from that idea. And so for the last 19 years, yesterday was my finish of my 19th year as the CEO, so I'm the first and only CEO. So it's interesting to be in an organization that started with a box of documents, and today we have multiple buildings across the street, and to see how the company has changed over time has been, a really, important kind of thing for the community, because as you see in our community, the vast majority of businesses are small businesses. In fact, over 90% of all the businesses in Northeast Indiana are businesses of 20 people or less. And so small business really is that kind of economic underbelly of the community. And so our job every day is a terrific one. We get to walk alongside people who want to make the world better, people who have a faster, simpler, cheaper, smarter way of doing things, and to be able to work with a wide range of people that have those kind of ideas and bring them to the marketplace. And so, my career kind of is in those 3 chunks. I think also a lot of work in community service. I have a tremendous amount of interest in healthcare and financial services, serve on a number of boards, specifically in those 2 areas. My expertise has been in embedded software systems, having run NBS Imaging Systems, which did a lot of these kind of systems integration projects all over the world. And today, many days, I'm a student, learning from the entrepreneur, the innovator, the tinkerer, and the people who are trying to make something better happen. And in that process, they need a lot of encouragement. They need a lot of technical support, and oftentimes they need money or people to help bring that idea to the marketplace. And so that kind of gives you a little bit of background, but I'd be happy to talk more about things that are on your mind. They can be career related, they can be industry related, wherever you'd like to go with the conversation. Yeah.
So with your company, when you look for people that are coming in, like students, what do you look for in them, specifically, maybe skill-wise, personality-wise?
Yeah, great question. We do not try to predict, whether or not the technology will work or not. Our view is that the entrepreneur will figure that out, over time, whether the idea is feasible or not. What we look for are the kind of entrepreneurial traits that show, what will most likely be successful, right? Resilience, right? The ability to take failure. I don't know if any of you attended any of the Startup Week activities downtown, but one speaker talks about grit, right? And grit is stick-to-itiveness, right? Your ability to relentlessly pursue something and not allow any obstacle to get in your way. And as he kind of dissected the word grit, which I think also talks a lot about what are those traits for entrepreneurs, guts, right? Only about 11% of the population over 25 starts a company, right? So we think about this as easy to do. There's lots of mythology out there that says it's easy to do it, but in fact, not many people do it, and it's hard to do it, right? Intensity, right? Our ability to stay focused on the goal of getting our idea to the market. Resilience, the ability to bounce back, when you've had something happen that might not be favorable. And tenacity, right? The ability to overcome all of the people who think you're crazy, right? Who think your idea is dumb, and wonder what planet you got off of when you decided to start your company, right? Because even today, and I think back to, my first job, my parents directed me towards going to work for somebody because that was viewed as safer and better, right? Excuse me. Today, it is more likely all of you, which is incredible. The educational futurists say that you are likely to have 11 to 17 careers in your lifetime, right? I maybe had 3, right? How great is it that at your age, you can be that empowered to have that many career options ahead of you? And so those are the kinds of traits that we would look for. On the technology side, we're going to go through all the de-risking. We're going to look at product, market, technology, management, financial, legal, all of the ethical considerations that go through evaluation of the idea. But only 2.5% of the population has the rare and special gift to be a really super successful entrepreneur. The rest of us have to surround ourselves with people that give us what we need in order to do that. So the vast majority of us need places like the Innovation Center and people who walk alongside them because they have to account for these skills that are necessary to go from idea to a big business. You don't just wake up today and then tomorrow be a unicorn, as a startup company. It just doesn't work that way.
Can I ask you, do you take an equity stake in these ideas that become companies, or do you operate as a nonprofit style mentor to entrepreneurs in a way?
Yeah, great question. The Innovation Center is a nonprofit organization. We do have a for-profit subsidiary. If we do make an investment in a company, we will take equity just alongside any other angel investor or investor in the company. But if we do not do that, we don't take any equity, royalty, or any kind of ownership of your intellectual property. And that's very different across the country. About a third of all places like ours are wholly owned by universities, and those universities take equity or royalty. In our case, we're what's called a community-based nonprofit. We don't take equity unless we actually invest cash in your company.
What, could you talk about maybe 2 or 3 companies or entrepreneurs in this area that you consider to be very creative and innovative?
Well, I think you're going to have one in a couple of months. Scott Glaze, all right, Fort Wayne Metals, incredible success story. The original ideas for the company came from Scott's father, and then Scott has taken those ideas and he's gone into so many other different businesses and segments of the marketplace as a result of his father's original idea. And so I think he would be a great example of somebody who, had a certain type of business, which has been mostly in medical grade wire technology, and he's been able to go into other markets and technologies with those products. He's also been a huge civic investor in our community. So one of the things about successful entrepreneurs who give back to the community. Scott's a great example of that. The revitalization work he's doing in Angola, the work he's done downtown to create more access for people to be able to get their retail goods to the marketplace, what he's done to improve the housing situation downtown with renovations of apartments and those kinds of things. Scott's a great example of, you know, an entrepreneur who obviously has a financial motive, right? They want to make money in their core business of providing medical grade wire, but at the same time, he has a really kind of give back mentality of reinvesting back in the community. So I think he'd be a great example of one. You know, Vera Bradley, both Barb, you know, and Pat, you know, starting their company in the garage, you know, and then it's a publicly traded entity today. And you think back to the days when, you know, they were, you know, they borrowed the money from their husbands to start the company, and you think about the company today as a publicly traded company. Fort Wayne does not have that many publicly traded companies. And so you think about the work that they did and the need, but also then think about the social innovation aspect of Vera Bradley, the Vera Bradley Breast Cancer Foundation. You know, they have tied, you know, the success of the company with a tithing back to improving research to you know, eradicate breast cancer. And so that's a theme I think you see in Fort Wayne, and you may well see it in other communities, because we're so small, it's easier to put your hands around it here. Is this kind of social responsibility associated with the economic gains that companies are trying to create. And I think those are great examples of people who are committed to the community, have reinvested in the community, and feel responsibility for the community. Also quietly, Chili's put everybody to sleep, but my kids were right when they said that
I told you all to be thinking of questions, so I know you thought of some.
I'm gonna ask another one while somebody, and I know a couple of students here are gonna ask something. You work for GE, and GE and IBM and GM were such gigantic companies, and then the thought became, did they get too big, acquire too many other divisions, and then lose their core focus perhaps, and GE has struggled and GM has. Is it possible that a company can't prevent that from happening? That success just leads to the fact that if it's going to be successful and grow, eventually it will become like a huge ship and it'll be too hard to turn, like a smaller boat? Or is there a way with better leadership to stave that off? So does success lead to perhaps gigantism that gets stale, or can that be prevented from your experience?
Yeah, it's a really tough question, because you know, you have to look at the culture of organizations. I can you know, maybe talk about two periods of time in GE. One is under Jack Welch. So if we look at the leadership implications to, you know, that kind of big question. In the days of Jack Welch, and I had the chance to work in corporate headquarters, you know, the thought process was integrated diversity. So we weren't a conglomerate, you know, all these disparate businesses, you know, owning NBC, you know, owning appliances, owning a capital and financial services company, that there was integrated diversity, that when some were doing well, others were in that cyclical, you know, phase where they might not be doing as well, and they complemented one another. And for a long time, Wall Street bought into that thought process of integrated diversity. The problem always was, you know, and Jack Welch was always frustrated that Wall Street didn't give him a premium for that. Because what Wall Street would do is to would take out the pieces of the business that were really synergistic and give them one multiple, and then give the core business a lower multiple. And that always upset Jack Welch, because he really felt this integrated diversity theme made a lot of sense. Fast forward, and I was not there during the Jeff Immelt years, but fast forward to the Jeff Immelt years, the desire was they purchased and acquired all sorts of businesses that made no sense to the core business of GE. It used most of their cash, you know, because GE was always a AAA company. With plenty of cash to do whatever deals it wanted. But it bought all these companies that made no sense, most of which have now been written off and have a value of zero. But they overpaid, and they bought too many of them, and most of them did not fit to the GE model of the culture. So I think leadership would say it was highly successful under Jack Welch. You had year after year increases in dividends, you had good stock price, you had good analysts on Wall Street that bought into the integrated diversity, although they didn't give him as high a price earnings multiple as he would have liked. And then fast forward to Jeff Immelt, the stock crashed, down to, let's say $9, well, I think it was down to 7 or 6, right? Because they were too heavily debt leveraged. They didn't have a story. Most of what they bought made no sense. So I think organizations have to morph themselves. Leadership has a lot to do with it, right? It has a lot to do with the decision making that leads to whether a company can survive, or do they need to spin off, right? Do you get too big that you have to spin off because you can no longer be attentive to the businesses you have? And I think that's been the challenge for GE for a long time, has been to make that work. Versus IBM, that I think has stayed more narrowly focused, right? And even GM has stayed more focused on the things that are in their core business. But when you start buying, if you're GE, would you buy the Subway franchise? Would it make sense for you to own Subway, right? Subways may make money, but what's your core competency? What's your competitive advantage? And what's your value add? Probably nothing.
Can I ask you a follow-up
Yeah,
question?
sure.
I'm sorry. Can I ask you to project about Elon Musk? And where would you put him? Which he is an entrepreneur, but he also runs a company and has had some trouble with respect to just SEC issues and saying things off the top of his head that aren't good for the company. Do you think he's someone who needs a CEO instead of himself, or do you think that's just the struggle that a newer, brilliant entrepreneur might run into? Or do you think that he's just the new wave of a CEO that acts and talks that way that we haven't caught up to that?
Yeah, I think these are really tough questions.
I'm waiting for them to
because they're
talk,
very-
that's all.
These are very nuanced questions. I think the reality, Elon is brilliant, no doubt about it. He's an innovator. Now, whether he can execute, right? Some innovators don't make good entrepreneurs. Some innovators aren't good CEOs. They can't execute, right? I think the challenge for what he's trying to do is he has a product market fit problem, right? Teslas are really nice but expensive, not made for the mass market. And he's trying to get there, right? So he's trying to drive that price point down into the $30,000 range, right? So that more people can buy the Tesla. At the same time, his stock has had a lot of optimism built into it that the reality just doesn't follow. So I think the issues there, I think you see CEOs more so today than they were in the 80s who say things that adversely affect their stock. You would never have seen Jack Welch in the 80s say anything that could be detrimental from an analyst relative to the stock. But today you see more CEOs willing to say things recognizing it might hurt their stock price in the near term. But they're still only thinking about themselves and not their shareholders, right? The shareholders are looking for a return on their investment. They're looking for good leadership to get there. But I would say think about it, the vast majority of innovators probably are not the right people to be executing and in the leadership role of driving their company. What happens over a long period of time, and I mean long is like 7, 8, 9 years, you have to replace those leaders because they are now obsolete to the organizations that they founded. They cannot transition themselves with the emotional maturity and intelligence needed to be what that organization needs them to be. And I think that's one of the big challenges for today's leaders is oftentimes they're gonna have to be replaced. There's more candor with Wall Street today than there was in the 80s, but some of the comments just reflect, I would say, low levels of emotional intelligence.
Would you recommend buying stocks for SpaceX and Tesla?
No, I can't necessarily recommend That's a question that my junior in high school asked me every day, because I set him up with a Robinhood account because he wants to learn the stock market, and there's no way to learn the stock market but to play the stock market. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of built up exuberance in the Tesla stock. It's still unclear whether they can really meet the market demand at a price the market's willing to pay. And with gas prices, not at $4.40 a gallon, the energy drive for the changes in technology are not going to be as strong as they would be if we had a much higher price at the pump, right? And all of the federal tax credits have almost gone away. And so what's left? At the end of the day, when you run the operating costs on an electric vehicle to your gas vehicle, unless you have environmental, integrity related issues, you can't necessarily make a business case as to why you would spend the money to do it. So I think until those, as you think about it, especially for those that may be in the business program, you think about, when you do your pest analysis, right? When you look at the external landscape of what drives competitiveness in industries, that's one of the things we would look at is the political isn't there to drive it, right? In the current administration versus previous administrations, there's less focus on it. There's no drive at the consumer level because the price at the pump doesn't push you to want to really consider electric. And his product has not been priced at where the general public can buy it, right? Until he can get that price point and stabilize the demand. I think it's going to be tough, personally. Yeah.
Okay, so what do you, if we specify back more to Northeast Indiana, I know you guys probably do a lot, but what do you find yourself mostly helping the newer companies with, and what seems to be the more core competency of the leadership as well in local companies compared to others?
Yeah, great question. I think, we talk just industry in general in this community. A lot of the family-owned businesses have kind of singular industry focus areas, or singular customers, right? So a lot of industry in Northeast Indiana has been built around a specific customer want or need. We have great advanced materials capabilities in this town, material science capabilities. Companies know how to design and make things across all industries, right? Aerospace, defense, healthcare, go across the industries. Northeast Indiana is blessed with lots of smart material science capabilities. And so those core competencies, you see most of these companies, specifically focus on niche areas like healthcare, aerospace, defense, logistics, transportation, those kinds of things. And I would say those are many of the core competencies as to how we might apply them to specific markets.
So I'm a freshman, and as a student, how would you say the best methods of becoming, or what methods would be more pursuable to become more conscientious with the business world, like just around, or what do you think that we should pay attention to try and acclimate, I guess, our own interests, whether it be entrepreneurial or marketing, or even just with accounting mindsets, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. So as you were, I guess, developing and at a young age and going through your career, I don't know, what kind of mindsets would you say that you felt were necessary in order to keep boosting yourself into these different areas?
Yeah, I think you've got to focus on a couple of things. Number one is, I think, in the old days, maybe during my dated career, right? It was called a T, right, for learning. You had to go deep in one area and broad in the rest. Today, it's more, the math symbol pi. You have to go deep and be a thought leader in 2 areas and be broad in everything else, right? So for myself, the 2 areas of depth that I have tried to focus on for the last 20 years is entrepreneurship and innovation and customer experience, to go very, very deep. So lots of professional development and education, lots of writing and discovery, but those are my 2 pillars of thought leadership, right? And then go broad in all other areas, which means you have to be highly intellectually curious. You have to be interested in patterns and trying to read things from a very, let's say, multidisciplinary perspective and try to figure out what those patterns and meanings and insights are in order to be more successful. But today, you should be thinking about there are 2 legs of your stool. You have to be known as a thought leader, right? So you have to be the expert in 2 areas, and then you need to be broad in all the rest, right? If you're gonna have a successful career, and be able to be put into lots of situations where you may not have the technical expertise, right? And you're relying on intellectual curiosity, pattern recognition, the ability to find insights, in terms of how you discover and process information. You're going to have to go deep in 2 areas, and that would be my advice: is think about what 2 areas you are most passionate about, right? Where you get purpose and meaning, and focus on those 2 areas and become the expert in those. And then make sure you're doing things that give you wide exposure to being able to connect dots, right? And that's what innovation's all about. It's right, connecting the dots. Entrepreneurship is the activation of the connection of the dots, right? So that's why innovators aren't always entrepreneurs. Some people love to come up with ideas. There are people in this town that have 150 patents. They have no desire to see any of that commercialized by themselves. They want to license the technology to you or to you, right? But they don't want to take that technology and develop it. So my encouragement to you is, what can you be the thought leader expert in? Find 2 legs of that stool, and then figure out the best ways to get generalized knowledge and insights across lots of different areas of domain expertise so that you can add value in any company or organization, or for yourself. Because if we look at what makes for a successful entrepreneur, domain expertise, right? The more, if we look at the research, the more experience you have in an industry, the greater your likelihood of success. So if tomorrow I decided to start let's say a business in orthopedic devices, but all of my experience was in defense and logistics, I can still be successful, but I have a less likelihood of being successful because I don't have those patterns, insights, and learnings that when I'm making mistakes, I can realize I need to make some changes or a pivot in what I'm doing. But that would be my best advice, is to really think about that. And one of the books that has kind of most driven a lot of my thought process on this is Patrick Lencioni's book, The Ideal Team Player, where he says you need to be hungry, humble, and smart, right? Hungry is that thirst and quest for intellectual curiosity and knowledge, right? Soaking it up like a sponge. Smart is not IQ, it's EQ, right? Emotional quotient, self-awareness, self-management, self-regulation, relationship management. And then, the humble, right? That the best leaders are what Jim Collins calls a level 5 leader, right? They have humility plus will. They look at the mirror, not the outside window, right? You own all the decisions and choices you make. You can't blame other people for them. And I think those kinds of things can start to shape kind of what kind of career experiences you want to have.
Thank you.
Yes.
You mentioned you are gifted with the opportunity to travel worldwide. What type of tools do you think it's important to have meeting all these cultures, and what did you get out of all these different cultures? Basically, did you bring anything back to your companies? Like, do you use a lot of stuff you learned meeting all these cultures today in your daily life?
Yeah, I think, or in January, I was sharing earlier, in January, I was in Serbia and had the opportunity to meet with the Minister of Innovation for the country and talk about what could we be doing in education and industry and small business, within Serbia, and also because I was with a local organization that has a very strong faith-based component. How can we marry the faith-based with really giving people a hand up to control their own destiny, not be dependent on other people. And so we're always looking at, nobody has a monopoly on the best ideas, right? And so we always have to have humility to say, and we also have to have the ability to absorb and then reconnect those dots, right? I said innovation's about, connecting the dots, and entrepreneurship's about doing something with the dots. But sometimes when you're connecting dots, you have to connect them very differently than you thought. And so you have to be very open to listening to what you're hearing and not hearing, and then figure out what you have learned and how that might impact what you're doing. And so for us, we don't ever go somewhere and say, this is the way you should do it. We go and we do customer discovery and validation. We try to understand what the customer wants. We try to understand. I had the opportunity last year to spend 2 weeks teaching in Beijing. And, the government wanted us to work with, 24 college students and have them start 5 companies in 2 weeks. They wanted to do it the US way, right? Couldn't completely do it the US way because there are certain things in the culture of the United States that are not evident in the culture in China. But could we get 5 companies started? We did. Because they wanted them to have experience, because there's a lack of role models in China, for people that have, been successful entrepreneurs, because most of the industries in China, are heavily government controlled, and they're not really entrepreneurial. I visited some startups in Beijing where there were 500 people in the startup. You know what the average size of a startup company in the United States is? Like 3.3 people. And the average size of a startup in China is like 500, right? Totally different. And so we have to be very mindful and respectful of the things that would help us, help that culture and that goal be achieved. And so I think you always just have to be open-minded. You have to be very much listening to the conversation, and then you have to do kind of your own due diligence of hearing from people. I had the opportunity over the course of that 2 weeks, because of some people involved, I had the opportunity to talk to lots of entrepreneurs to really hear what did they struggle with, what helped them, what didn't help them, and especially women entrepreneurs in China. Who have not necessarily been encouraged to be entrepreneurs, and hear about their struggles and the obstacles and barriers that they had to overcome. So I think with humility, you have to be willing to listen, and then you have to be willing to reconnect your dots differently than the way you thought you might initially.
So when you started your company, like you said, from a box, what were some of the hurdles you had to face, and how did you deal with them? And then when did you know that you made it, I guess?
Yeah, I wish I knew that end of the question. I think that's always a challenge, right? When you think you've made it, is probably when you should begin to worry. And I think that's what happens with larger companies. If we look at the longevity of companies today, the average shelf life of a US Fortune 500 company is less than 30 years, right? If we look at the companies that made up the Dow Jones today versus the Dow Jones 60 years ago, when you start to think you've made it, you probably are setting yourself up for the foundation for failure. So I would never say, I would hope that today I was working not as hard as I was 19 years ago when I started yesterday, but I'm working harder today than I did 19 years ago, even though we had far less when we started 19 years ago. 19 years ago, we had 3 years and enough money to get through 3 years, and when I was hired, they said, you have 3 years to make this happen or not, and if you don't, it was a good experiment, but we're done. Right? So if there's anything that motivates you to want to make something happen, that's probably one of those things. I think some of the obstacles were, number one is every community, and you have to think back, and for many of you, you probably won't necessarily for that time frame. In Northeast Indiana, at the time that we were started, not everybody thought you needed to have a center that focused on helping entrepreneurs. Today, all you read about is centers all over the world that do this, right? There are 10,000 plus co-working facilities, 5,000 seed accelerators, 9,000 incubators. Today, we take for granted what was not there 19 years ago. So 19 years ago, there's no burning platform for change. Fort Wayne was doing okay. Wasn't great, wasn't bad. So there's no sense of urgency. Number two, people didn't necessarily think you had to have a place because there's always this folklore and mythology, right? Vera Bradley started in a garage. Why did they need a center to go to? Chuck at Sweetwater started in a VW bus. Why do you need a center to go to, right? So those were our biggest problems then, right? And then, the third problem, relatively early on was when we started to go into a recession, where things were getting softer in Fort Wayne. And we have a wonderfully philanthropic community that gives back, but when you are in economic downturn, foundations don't have as good an earnings coming out of the stock market. There's a real challenge for people to provide financial support. And so we had to overcome those kinds of barriers. And then the most important thing we had to do is we had to figure out where we could add value, right? You can't just exist because you want to exist. You have to exist because you make something better, right? We have to plus up something that is happening in this community, right? And I think one of the things we're most proud of is 92% of the people we've worked with for the last 19 years are still in business today. And let's just do a poll. If you started a business today, and let's go 10 years out, what percentage do you think will still be here? 90? Anybody over there? Over here, anybody? Going lower than 90 or higher?
Oh, 12%.
12%? 25? Yeah, about 30% of companies that start today will still be here 10 years from now. 5 years from now, 50% will still be here. And so our 19-year track record is about 92% of all companies we've worked with are still in business. And think about, how that, you think about the stress of starting a company, think about what that does to your family, your financials, right? Maybe you're bankrupt. So we're most proud of the fact that hopefully we've helped people not move forward when it's not right to start a company. And number two, when we have helped them, we've confidently helped them move forward in a way in which it is likely they can stay in business, right? Because think about if those odds, would you want to bet on those odds, right? So take this room, we had about 20 people, right? And so if only a third of you were still here 10 years from now, think about the impact on our economy of all the lost companies represented around this table. And for us, that's one of the more meaningful impact things that we can do. If we can help people not start companies because it's not right for them, bad time, bad idea, right? We don't tell anyone their idea is bad, but it may be a bad timing for it. And then, helping people be more successful if they do start a company. Yeah.
What would you say your biggest failure was, specifically in the Innovation Center?
I think there are probably many of them. It's always hard to think about those because, in our business you have to be optimistic. But if I were to reflect and be honest, I think one of our failures would be that we did not respond to competition as fast as we should have. We are across the street here. We're about 5 miles from the center of downtown. There's a lot of energy in downtown Fort Wayne. We did not expand our physical plant downtown because we are so close to it. And that probably in retrospect was a mistake for us not to do that. Because now we probably have a dozen traditional or non-traditional new competitors. And I know it's hard for nonprofits to think about competitors, right? Because we're all supposed to get along, but at the end of the day, there is a finite level of resources in the community, a finite level of entrepreneurs. And so we do have to think about competition. But I would say, if I were to have a do-over, I probably would have established something downtown just to blunt back the impact and the energy of having so many new competitors in our market space.
And just to follow up, personally over the course of your career, what would you have done differently?
Yeah, it depends on what time period we're talking about. In GE, I would say, the biggest redo I would probably have done is I would have left sooner because I really enjoy the second part of my career working for NBS Imaging Systems, doing these very large systems integration projects all over the year. I didn't wake up a single day in the 6.5 years I was in the company where I didn't feel like we made a big difference and that it wasn't the most exciting work I've ever done in my life. And had I had that opportunity, the recruiter that recruited me here said, you're gonna love the job and you're never gonna, wanna live in the community. That was his marketing pitch to me to come to Fort Wayne. I would have, if that opportunity had materialized sooner, I would want to leap for that. Because what I realized about myself is I ran some very large, complex organizations within GE, but I didn't get to touch the customer very often. In the second part of my career, everything I did was working with governments and leaders all over the world to bring these solutions to the marketplace. And I enjoyed that more than anything else I've done. Yeah.
What would you say some of your business's advantages are over local competitors? Like in Fort Wayne, you talked about a dozen more have started up since you started. What would you say makes your business stand out over them?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, and it's a great question because, we all have to be thinking about our competitive advantage, right? What's that rare, unique, special thing? It's like the Coke recipe that makes you different and desirable as an organization to work with. I think there's a couple of things. One is we have when you look at the track record of success, there is no other organization of our type that has worked with more innovative companies than we have. And so I think we have a lot of knowledge of how to successfully commercialize and develop companies out of ideas. And number two, everything we do comes from a position of evidence-based. So we've either seen it work or we know it works and how we work with people. So we're not exploring how to do it. We know how to do it, and we're leveraging the very best brains in the world to help us do that. And number three is we are the entrepreneur's trusted advisor. So we only work for the benefit of the entrepreneur. And so our only agenda is to help you take your idea or business to the next level. What you'll find in entrepreneurship is there's lots of people that give you advice, but they may have a bias point of view, right? Like an angel investor says you need to raise more money, which crams you down under your 50% majority ownership, but it's good for the angel investor, but not so good for you. All of the advice we give to our entrepreneurs is always putting that entrepreneur first. And I think it's hard for entrepreneurs to find people who are only involved and invested in what they're trying to do. Yeah.
I know with social media, blogs, YouTube channels, things like that, people are making money doing those kind of things. Do you advise on any of those, or for those entrepreneurs, or are you just mainly tangible kind of ideas?
Yeah, we have different programs for different types of businesses. So for digital marketing type businesses, we have a program that's geared towards that. If you're an innovative technology-based business where you have a patent or some kind of proprietary advantage, we have a program for that too. So our only requirement is that we work with somebody that's interested and motivated. We do not run your business. And so it's important that the individual wants to be an entrepreneur or has surrounded him or herself with entrepreneurs to do it. We do not do the work for you, but we do walk alongside you to make sure you get the very best resources you need, in order to help you increase your likelihood of success. But today we have so many, that's one of the big changes in entrepreneurship is it's highly segmented. If you're in that kind of thinking stage, we have a program for that. If you're in the, hey, I've decided to do this, I've formed a company to do this, we have a program for that. So it's not like it was 19 years ago where we had one program and that's where we worked with all our entrepreneurs. Today we have 6, 8, 9 programs that are available based on where you are, what type of business you're starting, and then whether or not you're looking to build it yourself or if you're looking for outside money.
So if one of these students was sitting here thinking, I have an idea for a business, I'm not quite sure what I need to do next, what would be the steps? Would they first want to seek out someone like the NIIC or some consultant, or what would you say the tangible steps are for someone?
Yeah, the likelihood is high, right? When I started, I said about 11% of the population, so at least 2 in this room, either have already started or are thinking about starting your business. So let me do a test. How many have either thought about starting a business or have started a business? One in the back, 2, 3, 4,
I
5.
know this generation's more entrepreneurial probably than any generation in the past. I know they're geared that way in a lot of ways, not just even business, but an entrepreneurial mindset. So.
Yeah, and the thinking and then the doing, right? So 5 will likely convert to 2 over the longer period of time, just because, timing might not be right, the idea might, not be strong enough to move forward. But if you had an idea, most people think that they should write it down in a book and hide it and not tell anyone because they're worried somebody's going to steal it, right? And that's kind of one of the first red flags of entrepreneurs, right? If that's your bias, then time is your enemy because somebody's going to think of something similar or better to what you wrote in your notebook. So if you just protect the idea and do nothing with it, you are likely to be right alongside 97% of all the patents in the US. There are 2.1 million patents active in the United States. 97% of them have never been commercialized. They are good ideas, but they've never seen the light of day of a product or an entrepreneur or a company, right? So the odds are against you. So the most important thing is to surround yourself with trusted advisors, right? People who maybe can help improve your idea or improve what you're thinking. And so your attorney, right? A trusted advisor like the Innovation Center. And then maybe there's somebody technical that you've been working with on that idea if it requires that, or somebody that's a trusted friend that gives you good advice on your idea. And surround yourself with those trusted advisors and then start to figure out if you have anything of value, right? Because it's not enough to have a good idea. It's not enough to have a good idea that's patented. Today, it's often about getting that idea to the marketplace first, right? Think about, MP3 players, right? They existed long before Apple, right? Why did Apple get to be so successful and MP3 players not get successful? They figured out there was a business model around the iTunes services, right? Being able to make that all appear on your MP3 players in ways in which you were able to customize, right? So it's not enough to just have that good idea. Surround yourself with trusted advisors who can make your idea better. And then you have to really think about your motivation. What do you want to do, right? One of the first conversations we would have with you is, are you looking to build a company? Are you looking to find somebody to license your technology? You know, are you looking to give it up for the greater good, right? All of those kinds of things, right? To understand what your motivation is. And once we understand that motivation, we can help put you on that path, you know, to figure out how best to make that work for you. But if you don't talk to anybody, time is your enemy. And the likelihood is somebody has innovated somehow around what you're thinking, right? I mean, with 2.1 million patents in the United States, and today there's such a long period of time between when I file my idea to when I might get my patent. You know, we shouldn't ever kind of confuse ourselves with the fact that, you know, other people, if you think it's a problem, other people probably have too. And so the sooner you get yourself on a path to, I'm going to do something, right? Because how many times have you heard somebody in your life say, when they see something on TV, I had that idea, right? You know, I thought of that 20 years ago, but they didn't do anything with it. And that's the difference between the innovator coming up with the idea, connecting the dots, and the entrepreneur that actually rearranges the dots and executes it. And that's what you have to really balance. But so many people think it's most important to hide the idea, protect it, not tell anybody. Lots of people come to me and I'll just say, you don't have to tell me anything about your idea if you don't want to, or tell me whatever you think you want me to know about your idea, right? So, you know, but the more willing you are to share with that trusted team, right? These are people that have your back, they're not gonna steal your idea. You know, these are people that can help you figure out if there's something there worthy of moving forward. Because oftentimes I see people who have spent $50,000 on a patent and they haven't thought about what they're gonna do, right? And think about those 2.1 million patents and 97% of them, and let's say the average cost was $30,000 per patent. There's a lot of money sitting on the shelf that lawyers were paid, and there's nobody that's doing anything with the idea. And that's why you have to decide whether you want to do something with it or not do something with it. And we have tools to help you figure that out. We use psychometric assessments to help you figure out yourself. We use all kinds of business assessments about your idea to help you figure out whether you have something that's of value. And we'll help walk along that path with you. And I think that's why the conversion rate's so much higher, right? We can take you from a 30% chance of success to a 92% chance of success because we have a structured process for helping you make decisions along the way to say, I'm not going to do this, or yes, I am going to do this and I'm going to borrow against my house, right? And we want you to make those decisions in a very kind of informed way.
We've got about 5 minutes if anybody else has a question.
It can be on anything, doesn't be on entrepreneurship or something.
Can I ask you an intellectual
Yeah.
curiosity question?
Yeah.
Can you recommend to us any blogs, websites, quicker podcasts that may be helpful in intellectual curiosity related to business or entrepreneurship, or just broadening, as you talked about the pies, ways to relatively quickly learn more things that you have come across that you
Yeah, I mean,
recommend us?
Optimize would be a good one. It's a subscription base, so it's a little expensive. But he has an incredible toolkit, I think, for your own personal development. So optimize.me would be a good one. You know, I think, you know, audiobooks, so Audible, you know, and reading across the spectrum, right? Like, I do a lot of work in healthcare innovation. I don't have a healthcare background, but I've done a lot of work over the last 20 years in that. So I read lots of periodicals and journals in the industry. But, you know, I think, you know, find things that are meaningful to you, right? I like, you know, a simple one is the Kiplinger Weekly Newsletter. Gives you a little bit about lots of things happening in the world, gives you a chance to kind of connect dots on things like political and economic, sociocultural, gives you some information on, you know, certain kinds of industries. So as you're thinking about stock picks, like is Tesla a good stock pick? You know, things like that are helpful. The one that I love is it's the Idea Book Club. So there are 2-3 books, 4 times a year. All kinds of tools around that to learn from some of the big thinkers. Adam Grant would be a great one to follow on blog, and certainly a prolific writer. Malcolm Gladwell, Brene Brown, looking at vulnerability and how that impacts us. But if you go to like the Idea Book Club, if you don't enjoy reading, then I would say the Audible route and some of that would be very helpful to pay attention to, because some people just don't like to read. And then newspapers, Wall Street Journal, just scanning the front page of the Wall Street Journal, just look for connections. Just ask yourself how, the innovator's question is, how might we, right? That's how we have changed the world. That's how we have brought new innovations to life, is by asking just a very simple design thinking question, how might we, right? And so read the front page of the Wall Street Journal, or find authors that you have liked that you can track on LinkedIn. LinkedIn and the Linda Learning, there's some good learning in there on how to consume this information. But if you're to pick one, what I would say is, you're all busy students, you're already reading a lot, pick one thing and build a habit. It takes a prolonged period of time of consecutively doing something to change a behavior. Pick one thing you can do that brings in a new tool into your toolbox, and just stay committed to that one, right? So if it's the front page of the Wall Street Journal, great. If it's Optimize.me, great. If it's the Idea Book Club, great. If it's Sports Illustrated, great, right? Because there are things we can all learn in all of these patterns and insights and innovations. But just pick one and stay at it for a very long time. The theory of the case was it takes like 21 days to build a habit. The reality is it takes 60 some odd consecutive days to build a habit. Try it for the next 2 months. Just find one thing that you're not doing that you could do that would make you a better thinker, a better questioner, open up new ways of maybe thinking about things, and then just ask yourself, how might we, as you read this stuff, how might we innovate X, or how might we apply this thinking to Y, right? I think that would help a lot. Don't try to overdose it. There's too much, there's InfoWhelm out there, and you could consume all of your day just trying to keep up on all of this stuff that's out there for you to read.
Well, why don't we thank Karl for coming today? This has been fabulous. I hope it's been inspiring and encouraging and informative for you as well. So thank you for coming. There's still plenty of food back there, so take some with you when you go. And keep an eye out for the sign up for Rob Wallstrom.